these metrics, really thinking about that product-led growth motion, sales to enterprise. It really allowed Slack to scale to the point where it is today, and eventually going public and getting acquired for many billions of dollars. And it was really around understanding those core pieces and building motions around them, building some consistency, testing the heck out of them, and just understanding the data.
Hello, everyone, and today we have Nino Medina with us. He's a growth expert that previously worked at Google, Slack, and Netlify to help them define and scale performance marketing and product-led growth. Today, he's working as a fractional head of growth for B2B and B2C companies. Thanks so much for being with us, Nino.
Happy to be here. Let's do it.
Awesome. So what conversations are you having with leaders at early and growth stage companies? What are their priorities today?
Yeah. This is eerily consistent across companies of all sizes, whether they're Series A startups, public companies. I talk to folks across the gamut, and the one theme that I keep hearing over and over again is, how do we do more with less? Well, what does that mean? I guess it's important to identify what more means. The more, maybe in past years in zero interest rate environments, meant growth. Get traffic to the site, get people trying our product. Let's just grow the heck out of our product, and we'll see where it goes from there. We'll figure out monetization in it.
Right.
The conversation has completely swung to the other side of the pendulum, where more means revenue. How do we get revenue? How do we drive more of it? How do we get to profitability as soon as possible? So that's the one part of the equation. The more. What is the less? Well, less in this case can mean a few things, but primarily money. So capital. How do we spend less money to get more output? People. How do we get more output with the folks that we have? And so you put that equation and you get an output, and these companies across the gamut are asking those tough questions, and I've seen it with every company that I've talked to in the past year. So it's definitely a trend. This is top of mind. This is a problem that needs to be solved. This is a pain point. So, yeah.
Got it. And what are companies doing right today? Who's actually getting it right?
Yeah. Well, one are the folks who move quickly, the ones who recognize that this was coming and have sort of really taking a look and figured out, are we actually doing things the right way? And that means really challenging your prior notions of how you're tracking progress, what are the metrics you're focused on, and asking the hard question of, well, did we set this up the right way? Are these the right metrics to focus on? Are these the things that we should care about? And I'm going to pull back from my experience at Slack in 2017, which is a much different environment. There's an abundance of cash and resources, but we were very deliberate about how we wanted to scale. And so before we threw a ton of money into sort of scaling our growth program, we started with those fundamental questions of, what does growth mean for us? What are the right metrics? What is our North Star? Here's an interesting sort of dynamic that was happening at Slack. Like that time from first sign up to first dollar in as revenue, it take a very long time. I'm talking like on the order of years, not weeks or months, versus maybe other SaaS startups. And so we had to be very deliberate about how we would deploy capital given sort of that longer payback period. And so, yeah, we spent a lot of time thinking about what are North Star metrics, what is the value of every dollar we're spending, how do we think about attribution, and really getting extremely tight on unit economics because of this dynamics. And I find that a lot of companies are now doing that and kind of scaling back and really looking at those fundamentals. At Slack, we did that from the beginning. And so that's one of the reasons we were able to scale super effectively. Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned when we spoke earlier was around atomic units. Could you kind of dig into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So this sort of ties back to the notion of, are we focused on the right metrics? And again, given that dynamic of a long payback period, we really wanted to figure out what is the metric that is most predictive of a paying team. And so we started by looking at sort of the atomic units of the product. Well, what the heck does that actually mean? It is, what are the fundamental objects that compose your product? And if you think about Slack, it's super straightforward, right? It is a message. You can send a message to your colleague. You could be creating a channel. This is a space where we organize our work. It could be sending an invite. Hey, let's hang out in Slack and let's talk. And so me along with our data science team, really wanted to look at what are the combination of those atomic units of behaviors that are predictive of paying teams. And so I always like to label it as our version of Facebook's 7 Friends in 10 Days. The key insight that they figured out through a ton of rigorous analytical study is if a user gets 7 friends within 10 days of setting up, they're much more likely to be a retained user. And so we wanted to figure out our version of that, but a little bit further down the funnel that was predictive of revenue. And so what we found was a combination of sending invites within like an X amount of time period and simplifying to a North Star. Really galvanize the team, help us organize our tactics, our strategy, how to run campaigns, what are the channels we would prioritize first. And it really gave us a sense of organization. Now, was it the absolute most scientifically rigorous metric we could have come up with? Probably not. We could have spent a year really honing in on this, but we found something we felt confident through some sort of analytical rigor that this was good enough. We stuck to it. That was the key. We stuck to it. We put some resources behind it. We had a hypothesis of, if we do this, if we optimize for this, we would get that. And that's exactly what happened. So yeah, it's all about understanding the fundamental units of your product, thinking about just logically, what are the ways users can behave and express through product data? What are the things they are doing that sort of amalgamate into this North Star where your team can focus and keep things simple. So yeah, so that's what we did. And I take a ton of those learnings to this day and encourage every startup thinking about how to do less with more and thinking about, are you focusing on the right things? That's a really good fundamental question to ask.
I think that's super interesting. And were you able to use some of that? Because in terms of your background, you were at Slack first and then Netlify afterwards.
Yeah.
Were you able to use some of those learnings at Netlify and kind of figure out a North Star metric for them as well?
Yeah, it's the same sort of concept. So at Netlify, one of the core problems that we were trying to solve was free to pay conversion rate. We had a ton of people coming in to try the free product, and our free to pay conversion rate was to our standard much lower than we thought. And so we wanted to figure out, okay, what are the cohort of users? What are their behaviors? What are their use cases? What do they have in common firmographically that lend themselves to be more likely to convert to a paid team? And so it's a very similar approach. So you think about what are the core actions, what are the atomic units out of Netlify? It is building a site, it is getting some traffic to the site, it is getting analytics to your site. And so really kind of the same logic of what are those behaviors that folks are doing and trying to build a model, a profile. You can call it a persona, a cohort, etc.
Segment.
Whatever it is. A segment. You can call it a segment. But the key is we had a ton of users coming in, and like I mentioned, trying the product. And so the advantage that we had is product analytics. And so you can combine some of those user insights, segments with product data and really figure out, okay, let's focus on these folks when they sign up. We know what they're trying to do. Let's hit them with some lifecycle emails. Let's show them some messages and product and really help them understand the value of the product and connect them. And so they can get to the value and ultimately to revenue much quicker than they were before. So yeah, it's all the same concept, just executed in a different way with a different business model, but fundamentally same way of thinking.
I mean, that's incredible. Do you think that it's really hard for businesses to get to the point of using that fundamental strategy? Is it difficult? And what are the main roadblocks that they have in getting there?
Yeah. What comes to mind for me? Difficult, yes. And I'll tell you why. These are some of the dynamics that I'm seeing. In the realm of, here's the fundamental principle. Like for any startup, velocity is king. What you want to do in the early stages is get to product market fit as quickly as possible. And so you're iterating on the product, you're trying to see what sticks. You don't have a lot of data to work with, you don't have a ton of users, and so you're using a lot of your intuition and your product sense to sort of build the future of your product. And so at the expense of that is product instrumentation. And so what I see is once folks get to product market fit and they want to scale, and then somebody like me or somebody who who's run a growth team in the past, they start asking these questions, and you realize, oh wait, we're not tracking this or we're not tracking that. And so before you can even ask the question, there's a let's get infrastructure in place. But that obviously takes away from velocity of development of the product, which is that's always going to be important. So how do you make the trade-off between unpacking sort of the fundamentals and really getting those in place so you can ask these questions to grow while continuing to grow the product. So imagine you as a CEO, you're making these trade-offs every day, right? You have your product managers, you have the things you want to focus on. There's infinite amount of things you want to build. How do you take a percentage of those research to come back and say, hey, we really need to go back to the foundations here and build the right instrumentation so we can enable this scale in the future. I don't envy you at all. It's a super difficult decision to make. But the great thing is, there's a ton of great resources on this and great readings. I didn't invent this stuff. I've just leaned on the shoulders of giants. There are ways you can quantify this impact. And so you're not throwing darts against the board. There are ways to understand what the trade-offs are. And I think the important thing is just to have a framework of how you're making decisions. What's the time required? What is the expected impact? What is the confidence that it'll work? And that'll help you triangulate into, okay, now it's time to take a step back and build these fundamental pieces so then you can ask these questions and do some of this work. So yeah, that's sort of my point of view on that.
I think that makes a lot of sense. With regards to creating very successful strategies, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was also about figuring out within Slack specifically the qualified lead process. Finding out exactly which companies to go after you've gotten a certain amount of signups from them. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is sort of the evolution of Slack's sort of self-serve to enterprise model. And so kind of going back to what I was speaking to earlier, really focusing on those unit economics and getting that bottoms up motion. I think it was really important to sort of get that squared away and have confidence that, folks coming in, they're going to stick around. That's probably the most fundamental thing is retention and understanding that. So now once you have sort of a critical mass of users, you start seeing sort of these dynamics take place. And at Slack in particular, what we were seeing was folks like small teams within these large organizations were bringing in Slack, particularly the developer market. I think that's really the fundamental core use case in the early stages of Slack. They would bring it in, they would find it awesome to work together. There's a ton of efficiencies gained. And so if you wanted to work with a developer team within your organization, it would essentially necessitate you working in Slack. That's where these developers were living and hanging out and doing work. And so they would invite people in, and that's sort of how that flywheel started growing. What we saw eventually was once there was a certain critical mass within a workspace, it was an awesome time for sales to come in and say, hey, you have a ton of users using this product. You're just swiping your credit card every month. You might have a security issue here as well. Maybe we should have a conversation. And so through that simple model of thinking about critical mass within an organization, within the workspace, and having sort of sales come in, it just sort of makes sense to have a conversation because the value proposition was super clear. Somebody working in IT at an organization, they would hear that and they would scratch their heads and say, maybe we do need to look into this. And so there wasn't we're telling you what the value of the product is. We're just we're connecting you to that value. Those are two very different things, right? You can talk all day, but there was a fundamental benefit on both sides, and so we just surfaced that to you. But what I see is oftentimes these folks that are making decisions just don't have time. They're not paying attention. Maybe they didn't even have an idea, hush that so many folks are using Slack. And so we were just there to say, hey, by the way, you should pay attention to this. And that sort of built trust and facilitated an awesome sales sort of motion. So yeah, that carried Slack all the way to the growth where it is today. And it was awesome to be part of it.
I mean, that's incredible. In both of these cases, both finding the North Star metric and also finding the right data to use for qualifying these leads, do they change the game for Slack, Netlify, and the companies you've worked at?
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about where Slack was when I got there, The majority of the customer base, if I remember correctly, was maybe 60, 70, 80% self-serve. So these are folks coming in, swiping a credit card, primarily SMBs, small teams. And because of sort of this flywheel, understanding these metrics, really thinking about that product-led growth motion, sales enterprise, it really allowed Slack to scale to the point where it is today, and eventually going public and getting acquired for many billions of dollars. And it was really around understanding those core pieces and building motions around them, building some consistency, testing the heck out of them, and just understanding the data. That fundamental understanding and those insights were absolutely key for Slack to go up market. So I would say it was extremely fundamental to how they got there. So yeah.
Nino, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's just been incredible. You've been a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so grateful that you took the time to explain and teach me all about what you did at Slack, Netlify, and Google. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Many more to go. This stuff is super awesome to talk about. So happy to be here, and it was fun.